Hi guys, this is an impromptu video on my favorite authors. So first, Alex at What Page Are You On made a video like this, and then Steve took it and ran with it, made it into a tag, and he didn't specifically mention me, but he did say, quote, "I'm tagging everyone in the world, everyone in the world." So presumably that includes me. I've had this channel for over 3 years now, and I've always been hesitant to make this specific video. Part of it is that there are a lot of authors I would say I love, but I haven't read many of their books. And then I think we're all kind of afraid of being boxed into what we present in this type of video. And for a passionate reader, this kind of list is always changing. And there's something unnerving about having someone comment on a video that you put out 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and commenting as if the person that you are now, walking around in the three-dimensional world, hasn't evolved. I don't know, but I have been thinking about it more. And honestly, the majority of people get it, that this is the internet. This is where humanity comes to dump our opinions, some of which age well, most of which don't, such is life. So I'm not afraid to make this video anymore, and I actually think it's going to be really fun. The way Steve set this up is that you get 6 authors who are not quite your favorites, 4 you choose to be maybe almost there, and then 5 favorite authors ranked. So I'm engaging in the full spirit of this tag and choosing my favorite authors, not the best. That would be a completely different list. Well, not completely. Some of these are the best authors I've ever read, but let's be real, most of them aren't, and I don't care. And also, I haven't read that many books from some of them, I'm gonna be honest with you, but I feel such an affinity for the ones that I have read that, again, I've decided I don't care. I've jotted down my 6 not quite authors, so in no particular order, let's start with Sophocles, who's an ancient Greek tragedian. I've never known if that's pronounced tragedian or tragedian, so let's all pretend that I picked the right one. He's most famous for his Oedipus cycle of plays. Oedipus at Colonus has one of the greatest ever smackdown speeches where a father actually tells his son, "You are garbage, remove yourself from my blindness." When I think about his plays that I've read, it's really Antigone that has its hooks in me, and I read it for the first time when I was 17 or 18 and just didn't get it. It didn't have much of an impact on me. And then I reread it a few years ago, and God, it's so moving and subtle. And again, there are these amazing back and forths between a father and son. So Sophocles for me is majestic and perennially relevant, and I love him. In what might turn out to be a Monty Python-esque transition, my next pick is Lisa Kleypas, who's a Regency romance author. Some of you will have seen a piece that I wrote last year about my obsession with the genre, and when I'm in the mood for a Regency romance, nothing else will do, and she is my go-to woman. All of her books are the same, like, let's be real here. She changes the hair and eye color and the emotional baggage of the protagonists, and I eat it up. Keep that assembly line coming. As I say in that piece, I'm about as romantic as a vuvuzela, so I do skip the kissing seminars and the sex scenes of the tearfully passionate variety, but it's her characters' banter and their vulnerability and their shenanigans just give me life, so she has to be on here. My third pick is Elizabeth Stroud. So she blurbed one of our debut novels, and if that sentence makes no sense to you and you want to learn more about my job, I have a video that recently went up that I'll link below. So we were pitching this debut to a British editor, and that editor said, "I would walk over hot coals for Elizabeth Stroud." And I was like, yeah, that mood, a consistent mood. She's a literary duchess as far as I'm concerned. Her sentences are better than other people's sentences. And I will say that if you've only read Olive Kitteridge, that's my least favorite of the books I've read by her. So I would give her another go. Love yourself. Then we have Anthony Trollope. He's a Victorian author who remains popular, but I would still say he's underrated. He wrote sardonic novels packed with social commentary. So it's like checkity check, check, check in terms of what interests me. But one of his signatures is that his omniscient narrators are always interjecting and trying to influence your opinion of the scenes that you're witnessing. His books are just so memorable and brazenly fun for me. It might be a little questionable to include this next author, but it also wouldn't feel right for someone who loves the Redwall series as much as I do, not to mention Brian Jakes. So for those of you who don't know, he wrote children's action-packed fantasy featuring anthropomorphized animals, and his books are pretty huge, these big bricks of things for children. And the feasts are unending. The man never met a menu he couldn't atomize. It's also interesting that he was an author who evolved in quite a public way. He always had both male and female heroes and villains. My favorite villain of his is a female wildcat named Sarmina. Iconic. But he had disfigured villains for the first few books and was criticized for that. Looked back and thought, yeah, you're right. That's messed up that I equated, physical ugliness or abnormality with interior ugliness. And so his very next villain was beautiful. His books are so exciting and they have pathos that hits you with the force of a crowbar. And yeah, I will probably raise my eyebrows at this choice a year or two down the line, but future Jen can come at me. BJ is in this video. And the last of my true love, but not quite picks is Jane Austen. I adore 5 of her 6 books. Northanger Abbey is okay. Sure, some of you will defend it in the comments. I look forward to that. So obviously she's the Regency author who popularized the idea of 2 lovers who initially misunderstand and dislike each other. And when I say popularized, I mean that her influence is incalculable. Personally, I find her writing irresistible, and I do sometimes wonder if the fact that she's universally beloved makes me underestimate my individual love for her. When I think of Jane Austen generally, the first things that pop into my head are, oh yeah, she's great. But then when I open up to any page of her books and start reading, I'm bowled over by her. Okay, we're moving on to the 4 maybe authors. Again, these are in no particular order. And so I think the first one I want to mention is Edward Eager. I am surprised that he's on here, maybe more surprised than for any of the others, but it just wouldn't feel right for him not to be. He is a wannabe E. Nesbit. I recognize that, but the heart loves what it loves, regardless of facts. And I have a soft spot for children's authors who take nostalgia and evoke and examine it at the same time. And he's a perfect example of that. His most famous book, Half Magic, has a great premise. It's that these 4 children find a magical coin that only grants half of whatever you wish. So the boy in the family at one point wishes he were on a desert island, and he's transported to just a desert. So it's pretty simple in that way, and you have to double your wish to get what you want, but then how do you double your own happiness or the happiness of someone you love when that's what you're wishing for? And it gets to these really beautiful places. And if you're not familiar with him, the other book of his that I would really recommend is Knight's Castle, in which the children of the children in Half Magic go on an Ivanhoe-esque adventures. He is a hit or miss author, but even his misses are just a delight for me. An author that's less of a throwback is Robin Hobb. A lot of you will have watched me fall under her spell over the years. I made a long video discussing several of her trilogies, so I'll link that below if you're looking for specifics, but she writes epic fantasy doorstoppers, and what else I hear is that she can do it all. She can do plot, characters, world building, dialogue, and I'm always awed by the emotional intelligence of her books. My third maybe pick is the Argentine magical realist writer Julio Cortázar, who I love primarily for his short stories and essays. I haven't read many of his full books, but there are stories of his that are genuinely mesmerizing to me. I've reread them so many times, and there are these images and fragments and emotional undercurrents in them that have haunted me for years in some cases. Yeah. When his name comes up, it's like I go into these deep tunneled recesses of thought. He almost excavates certain parts of my brain. My last choice in this category is Hilary Mantell. I'm a historical fiction junkie, but even if I weren't, she would always be one of my literary goddesses, I think. Uh, Wolf Hall is the book that made me want to read like a critic. I remember being so pulled into it when I was 16 and being unable to explain what made it good, why it was operating so effectively on every level. And from that moment, I wanted to be able to dissect things and be in tune with the ways that I was reacting to the books I was reading. And I don't just say this because of the subject matter of some of her books. There really is something regal and commanding and wholly engrossing about her presence on the page. We've reached the big time. Here are my top 5 authors as of the year of our Lord 2019. You're supposed to rank them going forward. So number 5 for me is Marilyn Robinson. I don't admire Marilyn Robinson. I revere her, and that's not a verb that I would use for almost anyone else. There is this elemental grace that emanates from her writing in both her fiction and nonfiction. She's impeccable everywhere and cerebral in a gloriously intimidating way. And it's funny, when Philip Roth died and there were so many people writing pieces to the effect of, who are the great American writers who are left to us? And I was just sitting here like, last time I checked, you still got to breathe the same air as Marilyn Robinson, you hapless ingrates. Number 4 is Arthur Schnitzler, who by all accounts was a bananas individual. Of all the people on this list, he's gotta be the weirdest. He was a Viennese Jewish writer from the 19th century whose novels and novellas and plays are all a trip and all show in some way that the off-kilter mentality of the macho imperialist Austrian Empire of the time, and they look at the logical extensions and consequences of that mentality, especially for vulnerable people in Austrian society. He also kept a diary where he recorded every orgasm he ever had, both self-inflicted and not, I think. And I'm pretty sure it hasn't been translated into English, which is a shame, obviously, but it's a jewel of an opportunity for those of you who speak German. I'm going to be snappy with the top 3 because my plan is to read them all a bit more comprehensively, not completely, but get a handle on more aspects of their writing and then come back to you with a video just featuring them. So for now, I'll say that number 3 is Ali Smith. You guys are waiting for her to arrive. Here she is. Her style has echoes of writers who have come before her, but it somehow feels entirely her own. Of all the people I'm discussing here, she's the one I would most easily pick out of a forensic linguistic lineup. She's funny, and her books are critical without being harsh, and she creates intellectual fireworks, and yeah, I could go on, but she's number 3. Number 2 is Susan Sontag, and in terms of my reading experience, she's the most recent author of the bunch. It's been a pretty swift rise. The way that I always describe her effect on me is that it's like there are these ways of understanding the world and these foundational truths that are just off in the periphery of my vision. And it's like she comes up behind me, takes my shoulders, and turns me to face them. And number 1 is George Eliot. For those of you who have followed this channel, that'll be a real, that moment in Aladdin where Iago's like, "There's a big surprise. I think I'm gonna die of a heart attack from not surprise." That's how a lot of you probably were just there, but no one writes in a way that's as witty or lovely or meaningful for me. There's just no one who compares. Her compassion is unequaled in the way she uses it to illustrate her characters, small triumphs and disappointments. I don't know, I get emotional thinking about what her writing means to me. And you know that when we've reached the point where I'm no longer cracking jokes and I'm just sitting here in a pile of my own feelings, we've reached my top author. That was fun. I'm glad I just did that. Please let me know some of your favorite authors. Feel free to list the whole 15 below like I just did. And if you have a booktube channel, I strongly encourage you to do this and to really challenge yourself and see which authors slip in and which ones aren't there that you maybe thought would be, and then come back with me in 2 years and just be shocked by the choices you made on that particular day. Definitely credit Steve too, because the man is needy. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch up with you guys soon.